This is Metro Week. Our top story, it's Arizona Beer Week, and we look at the craft brewing industry's expansion in Tucson. We'll talk to new and longtime brewery owners.
Back in the early days when we couldn't give away an India Pale Ale in Tucson. Nobody knew what it was. It had a strange flavor to a lot of people, and now it's our most popular style. So times have really changed in Tucson.
Beer in America is still very much a David versus Goliath, where the craft guys are very small. We're less than 10% of the total market in the United States.
Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. This week, we're toasting a local industry as Arizona Beer Week wraps up. While connoisseurs have been celebrating the state's craft brewing scene, Zach Ziegler took a look at how this industry is growing in Tucson. It turns out local brewers are trying to make their products even more local.
Did Mitch leave?
John Paul Viberny is working on something that is very uncommon for Arizona beers. The hip brewer at 1055 is trying his hand at a beer made with all local ingredients. Viberny got the idea from a pioneer of the farm-to-table restaurant movement.
I was reading a book called The Third Plate by Dan Barber, and halfway in I asked myself, where does my barley come from? And I had no idea. So good.
Turns out many of the grains that go into 1055's beer are grown in Canada. That's common. Barley is one of the top ingredients in beer and is rarely grown any farther south than Colorado. What is true for barley is not true for another mainstay of beer making, though. Wheat is grown in southern Arizona, and brewers buy as much as they can.
I think a majority of our sales have actually gone to the breweries here in Tucson and out of state also. But here in Tucson, I would say on the order of several tons of the wheat. So I would say 6,000 to 7,000 pounds.
BKW Farms in Marana started growing organic white Sonoran wheat in 2013, and almost immediately, Arizona brewers began buying it. Just recently, they asked Wong if BKW could grow malting barley too.
And the breweries were very interested to use the wheat for brewing beer. And the next step in the process is that they wanted to source additional grains that they use for brewing locally.
So Wong and his son Brian set aside 40 acres where they're currently growing a test batch of barley meant for brewing beer.
It is really a test run. This will be our first time doing it. We're not too sure what yields we'll be getting out of it, and like I said, it all depends on weather.
Many brewers strive for more local ingredients. 1055 has locally sourced other beer components, including Sonoran white wheat and Arizona red limes.
But on the whole, it was maybe 10%, maybe 25% Arizona ingredients.
More local ingredients could be a boost for local farms. That's because Arizona's breweries are producing quite a bit of beer. How much? A report from the Brewers Association says the state produced 117 barrels in 2013. That's more than 3.5 million gallons. And in 2012, the impact of beer on the state's economy was about $664 million. Arizona's longest tenured brewery, Tucson's Barrio Brewing Company, will produce more than 1 million pints of beer this year.
We're on line this year to do about 5,000 barrels. So that's somewhere around about 450 or so barrels a month. There's 248 pints in a barrel, so you do the math and you get to 1 million pints pretty fast.
And how much barley does it take to make that much beer?
We fill that silo out there about every other month, so we're probably looking about somewhere around 25,000 pounds of malt every month.
And while the first batch of barley from BKW Farms won't be near enough to cover the needs local brewers have for barley, whatever they produce is already sold.
The malt itself is tasting really nice.
1055 and Darguun Breweries and local whiskey maker Hamilton Distillery will purchase all the grain that comes from the first crop, somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 pounds. It's not uncommon for beer makers to come together and share ingredients. They say it's that kind of collaboration that makes Tucson's beer industry thrive.
I believe that the more breweries, as long as they're making good beer, it's better. It exposes new people to beers constantly, and it also gives variety.
And for many brewers, getting as many locally sourced ingredients as possible is a way the industry is giving back.
I get to brew beer because of Tucson, because they're so receptive and they're great to us. So we actively try to support them back. And we're always on the lookout for ingredients that come from and reflect the community.
Now, one Tucson beer maker, Darguun Brewing, is undergoing changes in response to consumer demand. I went to speak with Tristan White, the general manager of the brewery on Tucson's west side. So how long has Darguun Brewing been in business?
We opened April 17th of 2012.
And why did you open?
Why did we open? Because we wanted to share our passion for beer with the Tucson community.
So we're sitting in your expanded tap room, and you were also doing an addition on another part of the building. What drove that need to grow bigger?
The production facility needed expansion just because of volume. We needed to be able to produce more beer. We've got enough demand for a product, and the tap room kind of followed suit. We wanted to offer a larger space that our customers could enjoy their beer in.
Expand a little bit on that demand. Where did you start and where are you now? How many people are you serving? How did you know you could handle more volume?
We honestly started with our owner and our head brewer and myself. From there, we've grown to 16 employees, and sales are always driving our growth, the company's future. We've been selling everything that we can make pretty much since we started.
Describe the Tucson brewing culture, community. Do you keep in touch with some of the other breweries?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're friends. We do events together. We collaborate, make beers together, borrow ingredients, share supplies, share. Nigel from Borderlands, their brewer, was just over. He had borrowed a piece of equipment from us for a few days. We borrow ingredients from people. We go out and have beers together. It's actually really fun.
Can you tell me how your growth may mirror or differ from some of the other breweries in town?
I think beer in general is always, or the craft segment of beer is always going up right now. We've seen double-digit growth in the craft segment nationally. In Tucson, we went from having 3 breweries 5 years ago to having 10 now, and there's 2 more licensed that haven't opened, and there's at least 3 more in planning. So specifically in Tucson, I think it's mirroring the growth that we see across the nation.
You mentioned that you all kind of work well together, are friends together. Do you think that having more breweries is a challenge competition for you? Do you think it draws interest to all of the breweries?
Yeah, I think it absolutely draws interest to everybody. Beer in America is still very much a David versus Goliath, where the craft guys are very small. We're less than 10% of the total market in the United States, and that's including Boston Beer, Sam Adams, Sierra Nevada, New Belgium. That's including all of those companies. All of us together are less than 10% of the total beer market. So it's not competition between us and Pueblo Vida or 1055 or Barrio. It's all of us in competition with the big guys.
What is craft brewing? You keep using that word. Define it for our audience.
The Brewers Association, which is the nonprofit that represents small breweries in America, defines it as small, meaning less than 6 million barrels produced annually. Traditional, meaning that we use traditional processes and we don't use ingredients that cut corners, essentially, adjuncts and the like. Independent, meaning that less than 25% can be owned by an outside controlling interest. So that's how they define it. What I would say is it's small dudes that really like beer, small companies that really like beer, putting their spin on a traditional process.
I'll flip that on you. Who is a craft beer drinker in Tucson?
We're a production facility. We're a production brewery. So our main goal is to put as much beer out into the market as possible at other bars and restaurants. So from that perspective of our external sales, our market really is bar managers and restaurants. What we see in our tap room is we see a lot of locals. We see people of all different demographics. And what's been really surprising for us, something that we've kind of learned, is we've almost become a neighborhood bar in a way, that there are a lot of people, we're on the west side of the freeway, there's a lot of people that live out on this side of town that have wanted a place to go have a beer or two after work. And there was not too much around here. So we've seen that there's this hyper-local kind of following that we've gotten. It's really a lot of fun.
How do you think craft brewing and the people who drink craft beers in Tucson fit into the overall restaurant beverage industry in Tucson and its growth or its economic impact?
Honestly, a brewer it's a very blue-collar job. There's a lot of hard work, a lot of physical work, and ultimately you're making something that gets consumed. So from the brewer's perspective, I mean, a lot of people think that it's a super glamorous job. It's a lot of really hard work. As far as our company is concerned, we've always wanted to be a leader in the beer community, specifically in Arizona. And I think we've put ourselves in a good position as far as what we value as a company and how we conduct ourselves in the marketplace, that I hope that we can be a role model as a company for small brewers.
What's a common misconception about the craft beer industry or craft beers themselves, maybe from the perspective of somebody who drinks the big name, big national brewers that you referenced earlier?
I think there's two things. I think the first thing would be that as a brewer, you sit around and drink beer all day, which is definitely not true. We have very strict rules about that, and there's too much other stuff to do. The other thing I would say is if you don't like one style of beer, that doesn't mean that you don't like all beer. There's many different styles. We've got 11 beers on our board behind you. They're all different. They all taste very different. And I would just say that you should keep trying different beers until you find something that you like.
Tristan White, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, I went north to Thunder Canyon Brewery at Foothills Mall. The owner, Steve Tracy, has been brewing for his restaurant 17 years. We spoke inside the brewery attached to the restaurant. Steve, we're in the brewing part of your operation in the Foothills Mall location. Why did you originally locate here 17 years ago?
Oh, 17 years ago, we were looking to open a brewery or a brew pub in Tucson. And at that time, they were rejuvenating the mall. So the mall owners sort of approached us with the idea of a brew pub in the mall in this part of town. And we took a look at it, and it seemed like a growing part of the city, and it all made sense for us, so we decided to open up here.
And back then you were one of 3 breweries in Tucson, along with Nimbus and Barrio, which was then called General Ben's. What's changed in that time?
Well, a lot's changed. You know, there were only 3 breweries for over 10 years in town, back in the early days when we couldn't give away an India Pale Ale in Tucson. Nobody knew what it was. It had a strange flavor to a lot of people, and now it's our most popular style. So times have really changed in Tucson. People's tastes have changed. The community's changed. There's really strong demand for good craft beer now.
And business-wise, is the expansion of breweries in Tucson following that demand and changes in tastes for beer itself?
Oh, I think definitely, yeah, and that's why we're seeing such a huge growth in Tucson, in the whole state too, in craft beer, because there's so much demand for it now. There's such wide variety, and people can't get enough.
When we talked to Tristan at Darguun Brewing, he said that all of the breweries in town tend to work together, maybe share supplies if necessary, and certainly have some camaraderie and collaboration. Is that how it always has been?
Well, it hasn't been that way all along. I mean, it's, when there were only 3 of us, we knew who each other were, and we didn't really get together all that often. We'd bump into each other. But certainly now with, 8 breweries in Tucson and 2 more down in Bisbee, we get together on a regular basis, and, we compare notes and, help out each other, especially with a lot of younger guys coming into the market now. They've got questions, and we're happy to help.
What does it mean to know so much about your competition?
Oh, we are competition, that's for sure, but this industry is a lot different. It's more of, there's a lot more camaraderie, because at the end of the day, we all sit around and have a few beers with each other. So, we really don't look at it that way as strong competition.
So as we mentioned, there's a lot more breweries around now, and I was looking at the numbers. It looks like that expansion happened across the state a lot from 2011 to 2013. What drove the demand or the expansion of breweries that year, in those years?
I think just a lot of people drinking craft beer, nationwide. More people coming to Tucson, coming to Arizona. There was more demand for it. And I thought we see that nationwide. We saw a big spike in demand for craft beer nationwide at about the same time. So Arizona just followed suit with that.
The places that opened in Tucson and maybe even outside of Tucson in Arizona, have they stayed open? Has that demand been consistent?
Oh yeah. You hardly ever see a brewery fail. It's just everybody does a good job, and that'll happen, I'm sure, for whatever reason. But really, there's a huge success rate in craft brewing.
You were able to expand Thunder Canyon to another location downtown now. How did you know when your business was ready for that?
A lot of different ways, I suppose. We hear from people who live on the east side. When are you going to open one on the east side? That type of thing. We knew we were pretty much maxed out on this brewery here. We needed more brewing capacity, so we started looking around for a second location. We're familiar with the brew pub scene, so that's what we wanted to do. I knew that new location would be a brew pub. It was just a matter of where. And then, I looked all over town. I looked on the east side. I looked all over, looked Marana. And then I looked downtown, and there's a lot. At that time, it was just starting to turn around downtown. And I thought, we've been in the community for a long time, and that, we could do our part, I thought, to help rejuvenate downtown. So that's the reason I made the decision to go downtown.
And you are only brewing here at this point, but you plan to brew downtown?
Right, yeah, we're still brewing just here at Foothills Mall location, but we do have the space and the utilities and everything in place to install a brewery down there.
Tell me a little bit about your volume. How much do you produce?
Well, last year we had a record year. We produced 2,025 barrels, beer barrels, which would be 4,050 kegs of beer. So that's a record for us.
And that's about capacity for this
That's
brewery?
pretty much our capacity. I think we could squeeze a little bit more out, but that's pretty much it.
And where does your beer go? Obviously, it's served at your restaurants. Where else?
Right. The majority of it's served here and also at the location downtown. And then we wholesale probably 15% or so up to Phoenix and then across Tucson as well in other bars and restaurants.
The industry's growing pains. Have there been any drawbacks or struggles as breweries have popped up around town?
I think there definitely are some struggles right now with supply of materials, hops and grain. They can be in short supply, particularly hops. Equipment, there's a limited number of suppliers for equipment. There's no used equipment around anymore, and so that's driven prices up. So it's those are the challenges I think that a lot of breweries face right now.
Steve, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Next on Arizona Week, we'll hear from congressional representatives back in Arizona on recess.
Now we're back in the studio with our Journalists Roundtable. Joining me are my colleagues Christopher Conover and Zach Ziegler here at Arizona Public Media. Thank you both for coming in today. Zach, I want to start with a little more about the economic impact of local breweries in Arizona. Now, we had two reports that had two different numbers about how much those breweries contribute to Arizona. The first was a 2011 report that showed about a $278 million economic impact from breweries. And then the second was from 2013. This was done by a national brewing organization that showed a $664 million impact. So those are really widely different numbers. Can you explain the difference?
Honestly, growth. That is how much this industry is growing. It is in an amazing boom time. You just have to look at the number of breweries. You can look around Tucson and see that. If you go back to 2011 when they did that first study, there I believe was 3 breweries. Now there's somewhere around 9, possibly 10, one more getting ready to open up. That's how much this industry is growing. And while there is a certain amount of then market sharing going on, more money going each way, it's also growing the audience, just like the head brewer at Barrio said in the piece. It attracts more people. People with different tastes can find different beers that they like, and it just opens up the market to new customers.
Just as we heard the other brewers talking about how people didn't know as much about beer back then, so people are learning, and that's also expanding the audience. Christopher, there's also legislation about this topic at the state capitol, which you cover, something regarding the regulation of microbreweries. So could you set that up for us? What is that?
I think it goes back, the bill and the reason for the bill, the need for bill, is exactly what Zach was just talking about, the tremendous amount of growth in microbreweries. Right now, microbreweries can only produce a limited amount of beer in a year. What happens if they go over that amount is then they become what are called producers. We only have one microbrewery in the state that right now would qualify to come up to this producer level. That's Four Peaks up in the Phoenix area. But in order to be a microbrewery, you have to have a bar where you serve your product, or a restaurant where you serve food and your product. What Four Peaks wants, and the other microbreweries, Santan just north of here, is getting close. They're not quite so big as Four Peaks, but they're getting there. They want to be able to get that producer's license to be able to produce more beer, but they want to keep their restaurants because that brings, as Zach said, a lot of people in. You know, you go in, you have a burger or something and a beer, and that brings a lot of people in. The big wholesalers, the Budweisers and others, they don't like that. They're producers, but they can't have restaurants. And they said, wait a minute, that's not fair. This bill would allow those microbreweries, though, that are Arizona-based to have their restaurants if they get to producer status.
What is the status of the legislation at this point?
It's complicated. It has been approved by committee, but there's a lot of pushback from the wholesalers, from the big boys, if you will, the Budweisers of the world. They're hoping that a compromise can get worked out. It's tenuous whether or not it will pass because of the wholesalers pushing back. But again, they're hoping that by the time it gets to the floor that the microbrewers and the wholesalers can get together and work out some kind of a compromise. We'll see how successful that is or isn't. We're done with committee meetings at this point, so any changes would have to come actually on the floor of the Senate and of the House.
And Zach, when I was talking to some of those brewers this week, they said that all of the local and small breweries are supporting this bill, and that the opposition is actually from out of state. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is, where it's coming from?
Well, breweries really see each other as brothers in arms. They're in the same industry. They're working together. And so while in Tucson, our largest brewer, I believe, is Darguun at about 9,000 barrels. That is 4.5 times under the amount that would put them into this category, but you still see support there. You see breweries that are turning out only a few hundred barrels of beer a year supporting this because they all work together to try and get market share from the big boys. And that's the thing, while microbrewing is growing, it's still over 80% large macro breweries who own the beer market. They are selling mostly to, mostly we're seeing, Budweiser, Coors, companies like that, still dominating, though they're losing their grip. Those companies are trying to hold on to it as best as they can and keep kind of these upstarts down.
Well, and it's the little guys rooting for the little guys. You might have someone like Darguun here in the Tucson area that is our biggest brewer, but Barrio, which is, has their restaurants and does distribution to some of the local grocery stores, and Nimbus, same thing. They want to see somebody make it because it gives them hope. Hey, if Four Peaks can make it, well, I can make it too. I'm next, and it rising tide lifts all boats. And remember that during the Super Bowl, most watched, beer ads probably of the year, Budweiser ran an ad going after microbreweries and people who drink, these craft beers. So they are feeling the pinch. It's not hitting the bottom line too hard yet, but it's hitting the bottom line for Budweiser, Coors, and the rest of them.
Both of the brewers I spoke with this week said they were calling their lawmakers, trying to get this bill through. We also know that the Arizona Bar and Restaurant Association supports it, and most of the chambers of commerce in the state. So what's the likelihood that that massive opposition from the big companies and the broad support from Arizona companies is going to get this bill anywhere in the legislature?
It's hard to predict what will happen in the legislature, but the fact that the chambers of commerce are behind it, the Restaurant Association is behind it, and there are so many microbreweries. I mean, we've just rattled off 4 or 5 here in the last couple of minutes, and there are plenty more that we all know about.
The State Craft Brewers Guild is now up to 80 some odd members. It's a massively growing industry.
So that's a growth industry. We like growth industries in Arizona, so there's a good chance that they can band together and hopefully get some sort of a compromise to keep the Budweisers of the world happy, but get it through. I think there's good hope for that.
It could be an issue, though, because this legislation was a part of a previous beer bill the year before that they couldn't quite get this part through. They wanted to get through a few other changes, particularly to-go growlers, the type of material they can be made in. That was a big push for a change, so they held this back until this year. So that shows you that they do have some trepidation about whether or not it will get through.
All right, I want to switch to another growing industry. Zach, this week on our radio station, you covered the growth rate for our solar industry in Arizona. You found that Arizona is third in the straight number of solar jobs, but we're slipping in the ranking of growth rate. Tell us what's happening there.
Well, Arizona used to be the second largest state for number of solar jobs, still well behind the leader in California, but we are seeing a bit of a slip. While Arizona's solar industry is growing at a rate that is well over double all the other industries, in the statewide average, it's not growing as fast as many other states. Many other states are seeing growth rates around 13, 14, 15%. Arizona is seeing more like 6.5% growth rate. And because of that, we were leapfrogged this year by Massachusetts for total number of jobs.
I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the fact that Arizona may have started growing in the solar industry earlier than some of the other states, as a sunny western state with land where you can put solar panels. Was that clear at all?
That could be. There are plenty of possible reasons, but one thing that we are seeing is some other states. California, the leader in this, is getting upwards of 60,000 jobs in the solar industry, and a large part of that is they are trying to go more commercial, industrial scale solar, also producing solar cells, panels in the state, doing plenty more work. So that could be part of the reason Arizona did at one point have a solar panel factory here in Tucson that has since gone away. So it's kind of hard to see where this will go, but there are plenty of large-scale projects that could be coming to the area. It's a perfect area to build for solar, and there are plenty of people who want to make this the solar power capital of the country.
And how does that growth rate in the solar industry compare to other industries? I know you watch the economic trends.
Yeah, it's astronomically better. We're seeing about 2.5% growth statewide, and this is a field that is more than double that in Arizona. So that is a rather impressive change, and it shows that, yes, this is, anyone else we'd be talking about how much of a boom this is, growing at 6-7% a year. So but since other places are seeing as much as double that growth rate, it's kind of like, what do we have going on here? How can we help foster this growth?
All right, thanks for that update, Zach. And Christopher, I want to check in on another bill in the state legislature that we covered on our radio station. And that is a bill that was changing some of the penalties for women who've been involved in or victims of sex trafficking. So first, set out what the bill is purporting to do.
The bill, and it has 46 co-sponsors as of midweek, which in the legislature, that obviously pretty well guarantees passage. Obviously, it is co-sponsored by Democrats and Republicans. What this bill does, it says if a woman is a victim of sex trafficking and is convicted of prostitution, if she can go back to that judge once she's gotten out of the sex trafficking industry and get those convictions sealed and set aside so she can get jobs, she can get student loans, all kinds of things convictions keep you from doing just because you were sex trafficked through no fault of your own necessarily.
I'm going to rush you in our last 20 seconds. How did the bill change this week?
The bill changed. It was only for minors originally, and now it's for all victims of sex trafficking.
Right. Christopher, Zach, thank you both for coming in today. That's it for this week. For more on the week's news, including stories that aired on NPR 89.1, go to our website. Now Arizona Week checks in with those who represent this state in Congress because they're back in town this week.